A very warm welcome to A-Level Philosophy. What, in your view, is philosophy? Just stop to reflect for a moment on what you think philosophy might be. Philosophy is the foundation of critical thinking. Science cannot provide answers to every single question, and that's why philosophy is very useful. Philosophy brings very important questions to the table and works towards trying to find answers to these questions. Philosophy encourages us to think critically about the world, and it is the foundation of knowledge, and if we use it properly, it can provide us with huge benefits. Philosophy helps deepen our understanding of many different fields such as the arts, business, engineering, the health professions and law, and many of the philosophical methods which we will teach you can be used in these fields too to provide answers to very important questions. How important is philosophy? Well, as we've just seen, it's incredibly important because it helps us to answer questions in many different fields and branches in society. But equally, it's got important value for you as a student because it teaches you a range of academic skills such as problem solving, communication skills, persuasive powers and writing skills, which are all very essential and will be very important for you as you start your future careers. Equally, let me just draw your attention now to two very ancient Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle. You may or may not be familiar with these names, but basically their ideas are still very much alive today, and this is further showing you the importance of philosophy. So the ideas and the thoughts of Plato and Aristotle then still dictate the essential features of our world. Right now, things such as what we eat, and things such as what we see on the internet are all under discussion and debate, and the influences of Plato and Aristotle. And hopefully, by the time you get to the end of year 13, you will recognise how incredibly important philosophy really is. So let's get you thinking philosophically. Here's a question for you. Who are you? What is it that makes you who you are? What is your personal identity? So we'd like you to reflect on one deep belief that you have and consider if this could be part of your identity. Because, think about this, a person will change in many different ways over their lifetime. For example, at the moment, you're just about to come into year 12 and you're just about to start and study A-level philosophy. However, in 10 years' time, you may be married, you may be a parent, you may have an incredible job, you may live in a different part of the world, and you will be very different to the student that you are today. However, past and present, okay, very different you, but still one and the same person. So what is it that makes you you and gives you your personal identity? Before we go any further, I'm just going to give you a brief insight into the course and introduce you to the A-level team. Mr. Stone is the head of the team, and together with myself, we have been teaching philosophy at Bullerswood School for 8 years. And this is me. I'm Miss Clothier, a very young-looking me. Some of you will have seen me around school, but I've been teaching A-level philosophy with Mr. Stone, as I said, for the past 8 years. The course will be taught over 2 years, and in year 12 you will be taught something called epistemology, the study of knowledge, and Mr. Stone will be teaching you this unit, and with myself we will look at the metaphysics of God. In year 13, with myself, we will be looking at the metaphysics of mind, and with Mr. Stone, you will be studying a unit called ethics. I'll talk to you about all 4 of these units in a moment, but you also need to know that at the end of year 13, you will take 2 3-hour exams, which will cover all 4 units. Let's begin with the topics you study with Mr. Stone, and the first topic is epistemology. So epistemology means theory of knowledge, and this unit will cover what the definition of knowledge is, what we can know and how we acquire knowledge and concepts. It will also cover the idea of skepticism. A small challenge for you then. Can you think of a proposition whose truth is 100% certain, i.e. something that you are not 100% sure of? And consider this, are there absolute truths? Because hundreds of years ago, people believed that the world was flat, and they had no reason not to believe that the world was flat. But then along came science, and scientists were then able to prove much later that in fact the world was a globe and it wasn't flat at all. So absolute truths and truths. Science can prove scientifically in a way that many people believe is absolute truth. But where does that leave philosophy? Well, whilst philosophy might not be able to give us absolute truths, it can help us to shine a light on how we think about what is and isn't true. While we might hold some of the beliefs that we have and what the difference is between belief and evidence, what do you think? How do you determine what is true and what to believe? Now take a look at this video and consider the different philosophical views about how we know what we know. From the video, you will have discovered that John Locke argues that we are all born a blank slate, a tabula rasa. That means our minds are empty of all ideas and that we gain knowledge through sensory experience, the way we make sense of the world. This view was very much supported by the philosopher David Hume. But again, as you will have seen in the video, the philosopher Descartes would argue against this view, and he would argue that knowledge exists independently of experience. And then finally, you took a look at the ideas of Kant, and he doesn't agree with either of the two views we've just discussed. He says we're actually born with innate concepts. We have these concepts within us, and it's the concepts which allow us to make sense of the world. So what do you think? Which view do you support? What can we know and how do we know what we know? We'll be studying this in much more detail as you begin to work your way through Year 12. Ethics is all about a system of moral principles. Ethics is concerned with what is good for individuals and for society, and it's often described as moral philosophy. In this unit, you will study different ethical theories, and you'll be looking to see how these theories can be applied to such things as how we treat animals. Is it right or wrong to go to war? Is it acceptable to deceive and tell lies? And we'll also be looking at simulated killing within computer games, films, and TV programs. Is it right or is it wrong?
Let's consider the trolley problem. Would you kill one person to save 5? This is a classical thought experiment which was introduced in 1967 by Philippa Foot, and it was to illuminate really, or to show us how difficult it can be to make moral decisions and how different theories can suggest you take different approaches. It particularly highlights a fundamental tension between two schools of moral thought: the utilitarian perspective, which dictates that the most appropriate action is the one that achieves the greatest good for the greatest number, as opposed to the deontological perspective, which asserts that certain actions, like killing an innocent person, are just wrong, even if they have good consequences. So, in both versions of the trolley problem that you've got, utilitarians would say you should sacrifice 1 to save 5, while deontologists would say you should not.
So what would you have done? Would you have chosen to flick the switch, or would you have pushed the man off the bridge? The most obvious response from research has been that most people would only ever be willing to flick the switch. The majority of us would not be willing to push the man off the bridge. And Philippa Foot argues that there is clearly a distinction between actually killing someone and actually letting someone die. So I would be interested to know from you what your thoughts are on this dilemma. And finally, this trolley problem has become a really flexible tool, as you will see as you start to study ethics. It's been adapted to apply to various scenarios in life today, scenarios such as war, such as abortion, and such as euthanasia. And you'll see how this all works in practice as you start to study the ethical topic with Mr. Stone. And so, let's look at the topics that you will be studying with myself. And we'll begin with the metaphysics of God, and we'll follow that with the metaphysics of mind. Does God exist? If so, how do you know? Where do you get your evidence from? If God does exist, what is God like? Who is God? What qualities would God possess to explain his nature? Think about your ideas. Let me take you on a journey to Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. Some of you may have been there and some of you not. So meet Cesar Manrique, an incredible artist who is the designer of the very famous cactus garden in Lanzarote. Take a look at the giant cactus which greets you when you arrive at the entrance to the cactus garden. It's real, or is it? That is the question. The giant cactus which greets you at the entrance is artificial and designed by Cesar Manrique, the designer of the garden itself. However, take a look inside and take a look at the fabulous cacti which appear there. Did he design those, or do they have another designer? And if they do have another designer, who may that designer be? Here's a paradox for you to think about and try to solve. And it's referred to as the paradox of the stone. And here it is. Can God create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it? Yes, no, maybe. Or can you spot the paradox? When trying to solve the paradox of the stone, perhaps you should reflect on this question. Should we expect God to be able to do the logically impossible? There are two very, very, very influential philosophers who have very different thoughts on this. The great St. Thomas Aquinas, he would argue, absolutely not. No, we shouldn't possibly expect God to be able to do impossible things. However, on the other hand, the great philosopher Descartes would disagree, and he would argue that if God is omnipotent and all-powerful, then we should expect God to be able to do absolutely everything. So depending on your thoughts on what we would expect God to do, that might have some impact on how you try to solve the paradox of the stone. In year 13, we start to consider the mind-body debate. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself or to think about the question, are you one substance or are you two? Do you have a mind that is separate to your body and which can exist independently of your body, or do you think your mind is just part of your brain and you are just one big physical mass? The great philosopher Descartes would argue that your mind and your body are two separate substances. They can exist independently of each other and they have two different sets of properties. But what does that mean? Do you think that your thoughts, your desires and your feelings could exist without a brain and could just be something or belong to something called a mind, which could exist separately from your body? There are many philosophers who disagree with Descartes, and you might like to do some research into physicalist views about the mind and the body debate, because many philosophers argue that even though at the moment philosophy doesn't have the answer to these questions, science eventually will be able to give us all the answers that we need. So what are your thoughts on this topic? So last thoughts. I just really hope you've had a really good insight into what life with us in A-level philosophy will be like. And I'm really sorry we haven't been able to deliver this lesson to you personally ourselves and to get to know you a bit better and for you to get to know us too. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions or queries or there's anything you'd like to discuss with either of us in more detail, please just send us an email and we'll be happy to respond. And hopefully we look forward to seeing you all next year in September.